There you go. As you see, Ryan successfully lifted off at 7:05 a.m. Eastern Time. Just got a few replays of that launch. Everything looked good, and so now we are 40 minutes into today's 4.5 hour flight. Things are quiet in the room here. Everything seems to be working well on board Orion. And we've already actually passed a couple of the key milestones in today's flight test with the separation of first the service module fairing panels. Those are protective panels that handle launch loads of the crew module and launch abort system above the service module, and also the jettison of the launch abort system itself. That's the first of 17 total separation events that we'll be keeping an eye out for today. But let's check back in now with Rob Navius in Mission Control Houston and see how Orion's doing. Rob?
Thanks, Brandy. Here in the Orion Flight Control Room, the flight control team that has been on console since about 3:30 this morning Central Time, under the direction of lead flight director Mike Seraphin, watching carefully over all of their systems as Orion continues on its first orbit of the Earth, having just passed to the east of the island of Madagascar in its first orbit of the Earth, first of two such orbits on this 4-hour 23-minute mission that will culminate with a splashdown in the Pacific west of Baja California. Orion in the upper stage of the Delta IV that has helped propel America's newest spacecraft to its first orbit of the Earth, currently orbiting at an altitude of 547 by 119 statute miles. Flight Dynamics Officer had reported a short time ago that it was inserted into a picture-perfect orbit, no issues associated with Orion's systems at this point. Orion began a slow barbecue roll a few minutes ago that is reminiscent of the spacecraft in the Apollo program, the Apollo Command and Service Module that took astronauts to the moon. It maintains an even thermal conditioning on the spacecraft to ensure that none of the avionics or the propulsion systems and subsystems become overheated during this 4.5-hour mission. Orion has been processing telemetry not only through the Tracking and Data Relay satellite system, but through a string of ground stations, including a ground station in South Africa that we're about to lose telemetry from, but an acquisition of signal from the Diego Garcia tracking station in the Indian Ocean is imminent as Orion continues its first orbit of the Earth. At the 1-hour 55-minute mark into the mission, the engine on the upper stage of the Delta IV rocket will ignite for a second and final time for about 4.5 minutes or so, and that will enable Orion to break out of low Earth orbit and travel to a distance of some 3,630 statute miles above the Earth at its peak altitude, the farthest away from Earth any human-rated spacecraft has seen since Apollo 17 42 years ago. So far, so good. Orion's performance is spot on. The only issue being worked is being worked by the instrumentation and communications officer, Shanna De Leon, who goes by the handle of INCO here in the flight control room. One of the 3 internal flight test cameras that are endemic to Orion is providing a bit of a degraded quality picture. It will be cycled on and off, and of course that and one other flight test camera. You're looking at the image currently from flight test camera 3. We're hoping to get that improved through a power cycle that the INCO officer here in Mission Control will initiate a short time from now, and that camera and another will be powered down when we move through the Van Allen radiation belt for the first of 2 such transits through this high radiation period to test Orion's ability to withstand the effects of radiation through its shielding and to see what kind of an effect radiation has on its avionics, one of the critical flight tests that is being performed on this maiden flight of the Orion spacecraft. Also, at this time, the propulsion officer in Mission Control has reported to Mike Seraphin that the attitude control system jets have been warmed up. They're in a warm-up cycle right now to make sure that they're all primed and ready to support Orion's high-speed entry back into Earth and a splashdown in the Pacific that is scheduled at about the 4-hour, 23-minute mark into the mission at a point about 600 miles west southwest of Baja California. So with everything going extremely well at the 45-minute mark into the flight of Orion, let's go back to Brandy Dean at Hangar AE at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. Brandy?
Thanks, Rob. So we are back now today with John Yembrick, the NASA social media manager. He came and gave us an update yesterday, and we wanted to see how things were going on social media online now that we have launched. I know there were a lot of people, John, watching yesterday and commenting on social media. Did they come back with us for a second day?
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Brandy. The second day launches historically are always, when there's a scrub or there's some sort of delay, the traffic's always a little bit lower than the official, the initial run. That's usually because we're doing a lot of promotion of that day leading up to it, and then there's always tapers off a little bit. So people did come back. We were evaluating the numbers yesterday. Were awesome. At one point, we had 3 very different things were trending in the United States in the top 5 yesterday. Today we had Orion launch was trending in the top 5 on Twitter. So people were watching, people were paying attention. Of course, the late hour, like we talked about yesterday, also impacts the amount of people in the United States anyways that can watch and participate in it. But it was amazing. I have a little bit of preliminary data from, since Tuesday, we looked at it yesterday, and we had about 360,000 retweets going back to Tuesday using the hashtags that we were promoting. And then just yesterday alone, we had over 218,000 retweets.
Wow.
Just on yesterday's coverage. That's pretty high, way above our average. And we're also, our impressions wise, yesterday was skyrocketed. So also we'll note that on nasa.gov, the web team informed us that it had was our biggest day of the year. Yesterday was. They couldn't watch the launch live happen. Of course, we're doing lots of replays, but that happens, and we suspect it's because all the heavy traffic that was coming in online at that time.
Well, thank you, people watching at home and helping us get the story out. We really appreciate the excitement. So, we've got just past launch, and now we are 47 minutes into today's 4.5-hour flight. Do you think people will stick with us through Flashdown?
Yeah, I absolutely hope so. As people wake up, there's more and more people in the country paying attention, I think, now than probably earlier when coverage started, especially if you think about the West Coast. A lot of people were still sleeping. But through Splashdown, it should be, I suspect things are actually going to get more and more interesting as we get images coming down and data coming down and the test activities happening. We suspect that, there's no way of knowing until afterward, and we'll have some final report afterward. But we're going to keep promoting stuff. We encourage everyone at home to follow us on Twitter, on @NASA, and all the main NASA accounts, and on Twitter and Facebook and Google+. Orion also has their accounts, so please follow those for some details on what's happening and get the latest on the test flight as it's unfolding.
Sure, yeah. Well, have you been getting any questions?
We've been getting a lot of questions. We always try to answer as many questions as we can. Like I talked about yesterday, part of what's important to us is participating with the public out there. But one question I know that we got that I thought was really, really interesting was about the parachutes. Are there, like the Apollo program, are there redundant chutes if one chute fails? What are the safety mechanisms to ensure that the spacecraft returns safely?
Oh, I can answer that one for you. So we've actually done a lot of testing with our parachutes, and we've designed a system to have some backup help. We've got 3 main chutes that should open at the end of the mission, and then we only actually need 2 to get down safely to the Pacific Ocean. So we do have an extra in case one fails. And we've done, like I said, a lot of testing out in Yuma, Arizona for that. But John, thank you so much. Real quick, let's, I guess, run through where people should watch online. Of course, there's nasa.gov/Orion, and on Twitter, you can find us at NASA or at NASA Orion, and all the other social media outlets out there are also covered. You can go to nasa.gov for a full list of all the accounts. But we really appreciate you sticking with us and helping us get the word out. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And then we're actually going to go now to take a look at what part Orion plays in NASA's journey to Mars. That's next on NASA TV.
Mars, a rich destination for scientific discovery. As we expand our presence into the solar system with human and robotic exploration, we're learning more about the formation and evolution of Mars, which can help us learn more about our own planet's history and future. In the past, the red planet had conditions suitable for life, and future exploration may uncover evidence of life, answering one of the oldest questions: does life exist beyond Earth?
NASA's on a journey to Mars, and the first humans who'll set foot on Mars are alive on Earth today. Rovers and spacecraft are on and around Mars, studying its conditions, revealing its history, and showing us the red planet like never before. On Earth and in space, we're doing the hard work to prepare for missions farther than ever before. First to an asteroid, and then onward to pioneer Mars.
During the past 40 years, NASA explored Mars through robotic spacecraft, landers, and rovers, dramatically increasing our knowledge about the red planet and paving the way for future human explorers. Future missions seeking signs of past life will demonstrate new technology that could help astronauts survive on Mars.
I think some of the most amazing things that we're learning are actually how to be really good detectives on another planet, which is a really difficult job.
NASA's human mission to Mars begins in low Earth orbit aboard the International Space Station, where astronauts are proving technologies and communications systems needed for human missions into deep space. The space station also teaches us how the human body changes in space, so we can protect astronaut health on long-duration missions deeper into the solar system. NASA will test other new technologies needed to send humans to Mars in the first ever mission to capture and redirect an asteroid mass to a stable orbit around the moon. Astronauts aboard NASA's Orion spacecraft will explore the asteroid in the 2020s and return to Earth with samples. This experience will help NASA test new systems and capabilities, such as solar electric propulsion, which is a highly efficient way to send heavy cargo ahead of human missions to Mars. Astronauts will travel in an Orion, launched atop a Space Launch System heavy lift rocket, which will be the most powerful rocket ever flown.
Apollo happened before I was born, so this for our generation will be the exploration missions that we get to see in our lifetime.
The journey to Mars will improve lives on Earth in important ways. We'll increase scientific knowledge that could help us better understand Earth. We'll also develop new technologies and economic opportunities right here in the United States. And we'll advance U.S. leadership in the peaceful international exploration of space. But make no mistake, the journey to Mars will be the challenge of a generation. To send humans to the red planet and return them safely so we can go back, keep exploring, and push the frontiers of discovery. It's a journey well worth the risks.
Today, our engineers and scientists are working hard to develop the technologies astronauts will use to travel to and work on the red planet. Join us as we continue our journey to Mars.
Welcome back to NASA television coverage of Orion's first flight test. Orion lifted off at 7:05 a.m. Eastern Time this morning, right on time. And it's now 55 minutes into today's 4.5-hour flight, making its way through its list of milestones. We've compiled basically all of the riskiest elements of flight into this flight test so that we can test all of the systems on Orion that are critical to the safety of astronauts who will fly on board in the future. Everything's going well so far in the test. We've been seeing some good video from Orion and hoping to see a lot more over the course of the next few hours. And we are going to go next now to Rob Navius and Mission Control Houston to get an update on progress of Orion in its flight test. Rob?
Thanks very much, Brandy. Back here in Mission Control, the flight operations team watching carefully as Orion is put through its paces on the first orbit of its lifetime. Now 56.5 minutes into the flight, Orion in the upper stage of the Delta IV rocket, traveling at an altitude of 545 by 120 statute miles, approaching the west coast of Australia. There will be a acquisition of signal through the Dangara, Western Australia tracking station to augment the tracking and data relay satellite system a short time from now. Orion's thrusters have been thermally primed. There are 2 strings of thrusters, 6 thrusters to each string. They are being activated and checked out in terms of their thermal conditioning in preparation for Orion's high-speed entry a bit later this morning. The refiring, the reignition of the upper stage of the Delta IV rocket to enable Orion to break out of low Earth orbit is just under 58 minutes from now. That will be a 4-minute, 40-second burn of the second stage engine on the Delta IV to enable Orion to climb to an altitude, a peak altitude of 3,630 miles away from Earth and begin essentially a highly elliptical second lap of the Earth that will culminate with its entry interface and its high-speed return to Earth for a parachute-assisted splashdown in the Pacific, some 600 statute miles west of Baja, California. With liftoff on time today, right on the dot at 6:05 a.m. Central Time, we are expecting splashdown to occur somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10:28 Central Time, 11:28 a.m. Eastern Time. That will be 8:28 a.m. out in the Pacific Ocean. And, of course, we'll be refining that time as we get closer to the point of Orion's entry back to Earth. Also, the guidance and the global positioning system hardware on Orion will be targeting a specific splashdown target that will be computed by the Flight Dynamics Officer in Mission Control, and will be reporting that intended splashdown point to you a short time from now after we break out of low Earth orbit, check out Orion's systems as it goes through the Van Allen radiation belt. In preparation for the passage through the Van Allen radiation belt for the first of 2 transits to test out the shielding on Orion and the effect of radiation on its computers and its other avionics systems, we are in the process of powering down the 3 flight test cameras. Those have now been powered down and will remain powered down for the next hour of the flight to enable the instrumentation and communications officer here in Mission Control to dump all of the video that was recorded during the ascent phase, including the launch abort system jettison that occurred at about the 6-minute 19-second mark into the flight, just seconds after the service module fairing panels were separated. Those were the first 2 major milestones for the Orion program. Both of those occurred by the book, right as predicted and right on time. And, of course, the data will be processed post-splashdown by Lockheed Martin and the Orion program as they pore over the data from this initial test flight. So everything continuing to go well. Countdown clocks here already ticking backward towards splashdown time, some 3 hours, 25 minutes from now. We'll be back shortly with another update on activities relative to Orion. But for now, we'll go back to Brandy Dean at Hangar AE at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
Thanks, Rob. So no astronauts are on board Orion today, but of course we hope to put them on board in the future. And to talk a little bit with us about that, we have astronaut Rex Walheim, who was one of the crew members on the last shuttle flight, STS-135, yes, and is now the chief of the exploration branch of the astronaut office, right?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, tell us a little bit about what that means. What is your role in the astronaut office?
Okay, well, I'm the astronaut representative to the Orion program, so I serve on Mark Geyer, the program manager's team, and we evaluate the development of the project to make sure all things are being designed to the ways that we think are important, and watch over the safety, and then pay special attention to the crew interfaces, the displays and the controls, and the ways we interact with the vehicle.
Okay, and you also are working directly with Orion, kind of giving the astronaut perspective on.
You bet.
So what have you been seeing so far? What have you? What's important to you as an astronaut?
Right. Well, one of the things we want to really take a close look at are the displays, and so we've actually started getting into the development process. So, in the astronaut office, we have what's called the Rapid Prototyping Lab, where we can develop some displays and working with our Lockheed counterparts. And we've been able to code them up and test them out, and then fix them from what we found in the testing. And we're doing this iteration. It's going really, really well. And so when we're ready to have humans on board Orion, we're going to have some great displays built up.
I think you've been inside the mock-up of Orion, testing out those displays yourself and some simulations.
Yes.
What have you found? How do they?
It's working great. It works great because it's it's another jump from where we were at the shuttle program. So we've got great interface where we can basically interact with the displays just using our hands on the throttle and the cursor on the control stick and cursor control device, so we can take all the actions we need, which is important when you're in a highly high vibration environment to be able to control the vehicle.
That makes sense.
Yep.
So I guess you probably got to see Orion lift off today.
Yes, I did. It was just magnificent. A dawn launch at the beginning of a new era in human spaceflight. It's just a spectacular day.
I agree.
Orion is flying.
All right. Well, speaking of that, so would you be willing to fly on Orion?
I would love to fly on Orion. I mean, as exciting as it is to go to low Earth orbit and to go to the space station, there's incredible things we're learning there, and the ISS is a U.S. national laboratory. It's our proving ground here, and then we're going to go even farther, and it just excites the imagination to think of going to the lunar vicinity, past the moon, to an asteroid, or to Mars one day.
What of those is most exciting to you?
I think the ultimate destination we all have kind of a consensus on is Mars. Everybody wants to go to Mars, and it's so important to go there and to figure out what happened to Mars, and to establish our presence on another planet, so we become a multiplanetary species. And that's very important. You know, Mars may have once had an environment very similar to ours. So what happened to it? What are the things you can learn from that? And then how can you apply those lessons back here on Earth?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you one more question. Having been on the last flight of the space shuttle, and now having been here and witnessed the first flight of our next human spacecraft, what does that feel like? Can you give us some perspective on that?
Sure. You know, on the last space shuttle flight, it was tremendously exciting, and everybody was happy to be there, and it was wonderful to see. But there was, with that excitement, it was tinged a little bit with melancholy, to be honest, because it was the last flight. And so it transitioned into this period where we were waiting for Orion to start coming online, and now we've turned the corner and Orion is flying, and that's a really exciting time. And so now you have that excitement back here at the Kennedy Space Center, and it's tinged with even more excitement with what's coming down the road.
Yeah. So we've got another flight coming up, and I guess a few years now on board the Space Launch System. I'm guessing
right.
That's also something you're looking forward to.
Absolutely, the Space Launch System. So this was the first tail number of the Orion fleet, and it gets even better from here, which is going to be amazing. So the next tail number, the next vehicle, serial number 002, is going to be unique for the ride that it's going up in space on. That's the Space Launch System. An incredible rocket. This magnificent rocket, when it rolls out of the VAB, you're going to look at it and it's going to take your breath away. It's just that spectacular, even before it flies. And when it flies, everybody's going to know about it. And then just after that, that's EM2. That's our first human mission. We have a crew on board, and that's going to be tremendously exciting too. So a lot of great things ahead.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming and talking with us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Brandy.
Again, Rex Walheim from the astronaut office. And actually, Rex mentioned that some work's been going on at Johnson Space Center on the displays that astronauts will use inside Orion, and we actually talked with astronaut Lee Morin about that at Johnson Space Center recently. We're going to take a look at that next.
Yes, my name is Lee Morin, MD, PhD, and I'm an astronaut mission specialist. With Orion, America is building a new spacecraft for exploration. Could involve missions to the moon, missions to an asteroid, missions to Mars, and we want Orion to be able to do all those things, to take 4 astronauts into deep space and return them safely to the Earth. And the goal was to build a cockpit user interface, a dashboard, so to speak, that would allow the crew to control that spacecraft for that period of time for these deep space missions, and to have the flexibility so that even if they were away from the planet for months or even years, that they would have the information they needed to fly that vehicle and return safely to the Earth. And the concept was to go with a glass cockpit, and what that means is that the instruments are all images on a computer screen. They are all on the glass. So rather than flipping a physical switch, the crew brings up a computer screen and flips a virtual switch, a little icon of a switch or icon of a valve. And with the exception of 7 panels right around the computer screens, which have about 60 switches, that is all of the cockpit of Orion happens on the glass. One big benefit is a weight savings, because you don't have to have a physical switch. And having a physical switch, not only is there the weight of the switch, but you also have the weight of the wire to the switch. And you have to have the weight of circuitry that takes that wire and feeds it into the vehicle computers. By putting that on the computer screen, you save that weight and you save the complexity of those wires. That gives us a lot of flexibility. And as we work with the cockpit, if we find certain ways that we could do it better, it's perhaps easier to update the software than it is to rewire the vehicle. It's been very exciting to see the Orion and the cockpit come together, and to see the computer software that I've helped write and my colleagues have been writing come together. And I think that these are the screens that the first crew that goes to an asteroid will be looking at to help them control the vehicle. These are the screens that the first humans who go to Mars will be looking at as that mission unfolds in the decades ahead. The Orion is going to be the linchpin of humanity's exploration beyond low Earth orbit into deep space. I get a chill thinking about the role that I've had and the privilege I've had to be able to participate in that.
All right, that was a look at the cockpit of Orion at Johnson Space Center that we've been working on now. And now we have with us the Lockheed Martin program manager for Orion. And he's going to tell us a little bit about some of the building that Lockheed has been doing for Orion since they are the prime contractor. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike Haas.
No problem, Brandy.
All right, so why don't we start with just kind of explaining what the Lockheed Martin role is in Orion.
So Lockheed's role is as the prime contractor, NASA's industry partner in Orion. So we do the design, development, production, assembly, test, and integration of Orion, the whole life cycle.
Yeah, and I guess that seems to have gone well since we launched it today into space.
It launched well. The spacecraft is doing well. All of the systems are operating pretty much the way we expected them to, and that's a real positive. The critical separation events in the early part of the mission all went well. The fairing panels we watched come off, which was terrific to see. The launch abort system jettison worked and covered the capsule, and then we got full data, so those are all really positive steps.
Well, so I guess Lockheed and NASA together have been working on Orion for a long time. How's that partnership gone, and are you happy with what you ended up with?
I think the partnership has gone very well, actually. It's we have a good team. We both have distributed teams across the country. On the Lockheed side, we have our Houston program management team. We have much of our engineering support in the Denver facility. We build the primary structure in MAF, and we do everything else in Michoud Assembly Facility. We do everything else here at the Kennedy Space Center.
Yeah.
And NASA also has support from many different centers, as you well know, and the ability of the teams to work together in that distributed way, I think, has been very positive.
Right. So I guess that gives us a good lessons learned even already for the next one that building has already started on.
Well, and I've said that through the course of this week, is that we've talked a lot about this being a flight test of the spacecraft, but it's also a flight test of our whole partnership and organization. We've done some things uniquely for the test in that NASA actually tasked Lockheed to really be the integrator of the flight test, so that we actually purchased the Delta IV from United Launch Alliance.
Okay.
We did the integration with ULA, and we chair the mission management team here in Hangar A&E at the Cape. So that's a different role, traditionally than what the prime contractor would do. So it's been interesting to be able to do things a little bit differently.
Yeah, well, it seems like it's worked out really well. So, so far, everything is going well in today's flight, right?
So far, everything is going well.
Okay. Well,
like I said, the jettison of the panels and the launch abort system were very important to us. Right now, the team is actually from the Mission Control Center in Houston. The NASA team that is actually supporting us in this test flight is downloading the first of several data files to get higher level engineering data from Orion. Later on in the flight, at just under 2 hours, the second stage of the Delta IV burns again, and that's really the critical burn. That's what gives us the high apogee altitude, and it also sets us up for reentry. So we know what our true reentry profile is going to be once we get through that burn. And then as we approach reentry, we separate from the just after that burn, we separate from the Delta IV upper stage, which is also the service module for this flight. So that's when the capsule itself, the crew module, is separate and flying on her own, so to speak. And then as we re-enter, we have the separation of the forward bay cover, which protects all the parachutes, and do all of the re-entry on the parachutes like we've done in various tests, but we do it in the real space environment.
All right. Well, so it's a lot to look forward to in the next few hours. All right.
And a lot of data to capture and review and continue to see how Orion is flying.
Well, we'll stick with you and watch as everything unfolds.
Okay, great.
We're now an hour and 11 minutes into today's 4.5-hour flight, and we're going to go back now to Johnson Space Center and Rob Navius, who's standing by there to give us an update from Mission Control Houston. Rob?
Thanks very much, Brandy. Back here in Mission Control in the Orion Flight Control Room. This is the Blue Flight Control Room, which was the initial room at which International Space Station operations was inaugurated back in 1998. The ISS was controlled from here all the way through 2006. The ISS, of course, now controlled from a separate flight control room since then, as those teams of flight controllers watch over the 6 crew members on board the International Outpost 24 hours a day. But the focus of attention today is in this room where Mike Serafin, the lead flight director, and his team of flight controllers have been on console since early this morning and now are carefully watching over all of the systems of Orion as we pass the 1 hour 13-minute mark into the mission. Orion is currently orbiting over the Pacific Ocean, moving from southwest to northeast in an orbit inclined 28.45 degrees to either side of the equator, orbiting at an altitude of 546 by 124 statute miles. Countdown clocks here in Mission Control are ticking backward toward the reignition, the second burn of the upper stage of the Delta IV rocket that is scheduled 41.5 minutes from now. That will be about a 4.5-minute burn. As we mentioned earlier, it will enable Orion to break out of low Earth orbit and head to a point 3,630 or so statute miles above the Earth toward peak altitude, testing out its systems as it passes for the first of 2 transits through the Van Allen radiation belt out to deep space, testing all of the systems that are relevant for this first flight test of America's newest spacecraft. It also puts Orion at the particular altitude that the Orion program needed in order to test its high-speed reentry back into the Earth's atmosphere, a reentry that will see Orion traveling at some 20,000 miles an hour, about 84% of the velocity of a return from the moon, which of course will be exercised on Orion's next flight, exploration mission number 1, several years from now. But for now, that first flight test sets Orion up today for its high-speed reentry back into the Earth's atmosphere. It will be a fascinating last hour and a half of this flight. About 1 hour before splashdown, Orion will separate from the upper stage of the Delta IV rocket. Its thrusters and guidance systems will be exercised as it barrels through the Earth's atmosphere, building temperatures around its huge heat shield to about 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit as it makes its way back into the Earth's atmosphere. A series of 11 parachutes will be deployed in sequential fashion. The final trio of parachutes, the main chutes, will be deployed and will reef in a rather sequential fashion to quickly decelerate Orion from a speed of 20,000 miles an hour to some 20 miles an hour at splashdown time in just 11 minutes. A very dramatic return to Earth lying ahead for the Orion spacecraft, with splashdown now scheduled 3 hours, 9 minutes from now at 10:29 a.m. Central Time. It'll be 8:29 a.m. out in the Pacific at the splashdown point about 600 statute miles west of Baja California. At this time, there are video files, packets of files that are being downlinked that have been utilized from the flight test cameras and other structural cameras on board the Orion and the Delta IV upper stage, the service module, which is a test article, if you will, a mass simulator article for this first test flight. All of the cameras that recorded video of all of the critical events during the ascent phase for Orion, those files are being dumped to the ground. They'll be processed as quickly as possible. We hope to have some of that video for replay for you at the appropriate time, hopefully in about perhaps an hour and 15 minutes or so from now, maybe sooner. We'll keep you posted on that. Here in the flight control room, this team of flight controllers who have been training for this mission for several years, it is comprised of a team of legacy shuttle and space station flight controllers who have had their sights set on this very historic day for some time now, and they are moving about their business in business-like fashion, going through all of the checklists, monitoring their systems as we approach the point where Orion's major systems will be tested. Those first two milestones that we mentioned earlier, the jettisoning of the service module fairing panels and the launch abort system that occurred just after the 6-minute mark into the flight, those were the first two critical Orion program milestones. That now to be followed up as Orion begins to flex its muscles, heading out into deep space and preparing itself for its high-speed reentry, the true trial by fire that you've seen in that 7-minute video that we've been broadcasting on NASA TV for the past several weeks. Also, out in the Pacific Ocean, heading towards the splashdown zone, is an unpiloted airborne vehicle called the Icana. It was dispatched earlier this morning from the Armstrong Flight Research Center at Edwards, California, near Edwards Air Force Base. The Icana, this is a view from the Icana as it makes its way out in the Pacific toward the splashdown zone, so that if clouds permit, we should be able to get some view, hopefully, of Orion descending under its three main chutes prior to splashdown. We'll keep our fingers crossed to see if that video will be provided, and it's all weather dependent at this point. Icana is expected to be at the right place at the right time. Now it's all up to Mother Nature. The Spaceflight Meteorology Group a short time ago briefed lead flight director Mike Serafin on weather conditions out in the splashdown zone. Winds are very light, out of 030 degrees at about 11 knots. The wave heights are within limits. Everything is green as far as the weather constraints for splashdown and the ultimate recovery of Orion by the combined NASA U.S. Navy recovery team that will be led off of the USS Anchorage and the U.S. naval ship Salvor that are on station in the splashdown zone. So again, everything continuing to go very well as we approach the point about 36 minutes from now where Orion is going to be elevated into its second and final orbit, a highly elliptical orbit that will enable it to move away from low Earth orbit, the first time a human-rated spacecraft will have broken out of low Earth orbit since Apollo 17, 42 years ago. Here in the flight control room, the team of flight controllers once again looking over the data from its console positions. One of the busiest consoles is the INCO console, the Instrumentation and Communications Officer here in Mission Control. That is Shanna de Leon, who is sitting next to Mike Serafin, the lead flight director here in the Blue Flight Control Room, the Orion Flight Control Room. She's busy monitoring the dumping of data files in the form of video and monitoring the preparation for a number of the onboard systems to be powered down, including the flight test cameras as at the point that we would be entering the first radiation period, the first passage through the Van Allen radiation belt that will be occurring a short time after we break out of low Earth orbit, and a short time after we head towards peak altitude. Some of the key times to be monitoring upcoming here will be the second or reignition of the upper stage of the Delta IV rocket that's expected at 8 a.m. Central Time. Again, that will be about a 4.5-minute burn of the single-engine Stage 2, the upper stage of the Delta IV. The first stage separated at about the 5-minute 40-second mark into the flight after the on-time launch from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station at 6:05 a.m. Central Time, 7:05 a.m. Eastern Time this morning. Again, the refiring of the upper stage of the Delta IV rocket to propel Orion out of low Earth orbit coming up at 8 a.m. Central Time. We expect SECO-2, or second stage engine cutoff number 2, to occur at 8:05 a.m. Right after that, at 8:44 a.m., the propulsion officer here in Mission Control will be monitoring the activation of Orion's reaction control system jets. Again, these are 2 strings of 6 thrusters apiece, a total of 12 thrusters in all on Orion, fully redundant, that will help fine-tune Orion's path back to its splashdown target in the Pacific after it passes through the Earth's atmosphere in the final stage of this test flight. The Flight Dynamics Officer here in Mission Control, Mark McDonald, will provide a preliminary update to Flight Director Mike Serafin on our splashdown latitude and longitude target. That should be coming up at about 8:50 a.m. Central Time. And then one key moment in this flight will be arrival at peak altitude at 9:05 a.m. Central Time. We're 3 hours into the mission. We should reach that magic point of about 3,630 statute miles above the Earth. And if all goes as planned, we should get a view of the Earth as a disk out of one of the windows in the crew module of Orion that would be the first view of Earth from that distance from a human-rated spacecraft since Apollo 17, 42 years ago. From that point, we will be accelerating the number of key activities in trip hammer fashion as the crew module will be commanded to separate from the service module at 9:28 a.m. Central Time, following the enabling of the attitude control system jets on Orion. And then, if all goes as planned and if Orion's systems continue to go in smooth fashion as they have so far in the first hour and a half of this mission, Flight Director Mike Serafin is likely, he'll be assessing those systems, but would be then in a position to give a go, no-go decision for an extended power-up of Orion after it splashes down in the Pacific to enable Lockheed Martin to acquire additional bonus thermal data on the behavior and performance of the spacecraft as it bobs up and down in the Pacific, waiting for its recovery by the U.S. Navy NASA recovery team. A 10-second firing of the thrusters on Orion is scheduled at 10:02 a.m. Central Time. That is called a crew module raise burn. That's the nomenclature for essentially a testing of the thrusters to put it in the proper attitude or orientation prior to entry interface that is scheduled at 10:16 a.m. Central Time today. And then at that point, everything moves in very, very fast fashion as we move from a point where Orion will be traveling about 20,000 miles an hour to a point at splashdown some 12 minutes later, where it will splash down at a gentle rate under 3 main parachutes at about 20 miles an hour. Here in the flight control room, the team monitoring all of Orion's systems. Virtually no chatter on the loops. Orion is performing to near perfection at this point in the first hour and a half of its maiden flight as it currently crosses the Pacific and now has crossed the equator, moving from southwest to northeast on the home stretch of its first orbit of the Earth, with the second stage restart of the engine on that Delta IV upper stage now less than 28 minutes from now. At this point, as we approach the 1.5 hour mark into the mission, all of Orion's systems continue to perform in champion fashion, orbiting at an altitude of 548 by 119 statute miles, and as we mentioned, currently traveling in darkness atop the service module mass simulator article designed specifically for this test flight, approaching the point at the end of its first orbit of the Earth, in which that second stage engine will reignite for 4 minutes and 30 seconds roughly to send Orion out of low Earth orbit. The first radiation period that Orion will pass through, its first transit through the Van Allen radiation belt, in which its shielding and its avionics and computers will be tested against the harsh effects of radiation. That will occur at the 2 hour, 5 minute mark into the mission, or about 8:10 a.m. Central Time. It's about a 15-minute transit the flight test cameras on board Orion, and there are 3 of them, one that looks out of the docking hatch at the top of the spacecraft, and the other 2 look out of the 2 other windows on Orion, the so-called commander's window and the pilot's window, providing various views and data collection points for the exercising of the systems on Orion on this first test flight. Once Orion passes out of the Van Allen radiation belt, climbing to its peak altitude, those flight test cameras will be powered up once again, and a short time after that, we should have a better idea of our targeted splashdown point in the Pacific as the flight dynamics officer begins to process data post-radiation transit through the guidance system aboard Orion, which so far is performing to perfection, as well as the spacecraft's global positioning system hardware. Now passing the 1 hour 32 minute mark into the flight, less than 3 hours left in this test flight for Orion, and just 22 and a half minutes to go until the reignition of the upper stage engine on Orion. Data files continue to be downlinked and will be for about another 20 minutes or so, including video captured by the flight test cameras during the critical ascent events that took place following the launch of Orion atop a Delta IV Heavy rocket from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station right on time at 6:05 a.m. Central Time, 7:05 a.m. Eastern Time this morning at the opening of its window on the second try. So, as we approach the point of Orion's exit from low Earth orbit, which will be another major milestone in this first test flight of America's newest spacecraft, we'll go back for the time being to the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station and Hangar AE, and our anchor for today's broadcast, Brandy Dean. Brandy?
Thanks, Rob. Good to hear everything's going so well. I'm here in the Mission Directors Center, which is at the Hangar AE at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida. And behind me here is the mission management team. They're the ones who, if anything does crop up that falls outside of Orion's flight rules, they'll be the ones to make the decision on how to deal with it. They're led by Lockheed Martin Mission Director Brian Austin, and the team's made up of a mix of program and operation managers from NASA and Orion and Lockheed Martin. They're busy monitoring today's flight test, and as you heard from Rob, everything's going so well that they haven't had a lot to address just yet. But I think they're having a good time all the same. Seeing Orion in space for the first time, now an hour and 34 minutes into the mission. Technically, the full name of Orion is the Multi-Purpose Crew Vehicle, and the reason for that is that it's built so that Orion can take us basically anywhere we want to go. Although the shuttle and space station were, without a doubt, great vehicles that did amazing things, and in the case of the space station, it's still doing amazing things, they were limited in the fact that they could only go in circles around the Earth. We built Orion to take us much further than that, and this flight alone is going to take us 3,600 miles above the Earth, which is farther than any spacecraft built for a human has been in more than 40 years. And we spoke with Orion mission planning and analysis lead Nujoud Merancy about what it is that makes Orion so versatile. We're going to take a look at that next here on NASA TV.
My name is Nujoud Merancy, and I'm the mission planning and analysis lead for Orion. So Orion fits into the overall exploration architecture by being the vehicle that really gets the crew safely to and from Earth and can provide for them for 21 days worth for up to 4 crew of supplies and breathable air and things like that. We're really designed to be the first stepping stone to a wide variety of missions. We can go to asteroids with the crew, and we can go to Mars, and those things all need more equipment, but Orion will be that first piece, and we'll be able to support a lot of missions in whatever the plans for exploration are in the future. So in order to be versatile, Orion is treating it like upgrade kits. It's almost a plug-and-play system, where right now we're building the base vehicle, and that's what essentially we're flying on EFT-1. And then for follow-on missions, we can keep adding to it. We can add the docking system, we can add a water kit to extend a mission, we can add thermal protection. We could change the heat shield to make it thicker, which would handle a higher speed entry. And really what you need when you go beyond is to add a habitat module to Orion to give the crew enough space. So all of these things we can modify over time and build up and take away as needed as technology improves as well. So what I like best about working on Orion is we're building the exploration vehicle. So I mean, I grew up watching the shuttle, and I worked on the space station, and all of those are in low Earth orbit, but for me it's we're really going to go beyond. No one's been higher than a few hundred kilometers from Earth in my lifetime, so I'm very proud to be a part of sending people beyond low Earth orbit again.
Nujoud is here in Florida today, doing her own part in the mission. She's watching over Orion's timeline, which, as we've been saying, is proceeding just as planned. Right now, the cameras have been turned off so that the teams here on the ground could get some recorded video down from Orion, and we'll hope to take a look at that later in the mission. It should show the launch abort system jettison, and that we hope we'll be able to see before splashdown, but if not, we'll get it to you as soon as possible afterward. In the meantime, we're getting close to the point where we'll turn Orion's cameras inside the crew module back on and hopefully give you some more great Earth views to take a look at. Everything's going well on board Orion. In today's flight test, we're an hour and 37 minutes into it, and as we've been saying, no issues cropping up so far. Everything proceeding smoothly.